Hello, world singers! My name is Brooke.
And I'm Tyler.
And this is
Cosmere
Cosmere Conversations.
We are back for episode 16, a continuation of our last episode where we brought to you all of the key characters from Oathbringer that have the last name Colin, but there's a bunch of other characters that we need to get through.
That's true. The Colin family is big, but doesn't include these people.
And for...
At least not yet.
We do have Shallan kind of joining the Colins through marriage. So
yep.
I guess the Colin family is ever expanding.
And I did think, in a weird way, Kaladin is like a little bit like Dalinar's son in Oathbringer.
Yeah, I mean, you have a deep relationship between them, obviously kind of starting with Kaladin saving Dalinar, and then Dalinar saving Kaladin, and then becoming the Knights Radiant combo. So you do have kind of a deep familial-like bond growing between all of these characters. And I think that's part of the reason why so many people enjoy these character relationships, because they are kind of developing more as the books continue, but they're also like heartfelt and deep relationships.
Yeah, definitely. They're satisfying.
We are going to go through, in the same way we did last week, several of the characters from Oathbringer and kind of hit the arcs that they experience throughout the story. Last week, we started with a quote, and we kind of saw it as one of the uniting themes throughout Oathbringer, that all of these characters are kind of dealing with similar issues. Brooke, could you read for us that quote one more time and just maybe talk about the significance?
Yeah. Quote, "I will take responsibility for what I have done," Dalinar whispered. "If I must fall, I will rise each time a better man." End quote. And to me, I think that just sort of encompasses a similar philosophy that a lot of these character arcs are exploring in different ways. Obviously, we see Dalinar embracing that arc in, a very specific and concrete way. But I think that each of these characters sort of explores a different aspect of that same idea.
Yeah, the idea of failing and coming to terms with past failures or present failures. And I think that the individual that is probably dealing with some of the most extreme versions of failure in Oathbringer is Kaladin, who, started Way of Kings as kind of the primary focus, and then each book has kind of jumped to different characters as the primary focus. But Kaladin is where we started and where many people kind of originally got into Stormlight Archive following Kaladin's arc. He's a troubled individual, always has been a troubled individual, and without going into like years of background about Kaladin, I do want to keep us like pretty tight on just what happened in Oathbringer, but I think it's just kind of important to remind everyone that as long as we have known Kaladin, even in the flashbacks, he does seem to be an individual that has struggled with depression in one way or another. I think the most obvious in the flashbacks is with seasonal depression.
Yeah, I was going to say weeping. Definitely seasonal depression. There's a really nice moment in Oathbringer when it's raining and he's thinking about how the rain makes him feel so crappy. I'll drop the quote here. Quote, "Perhaps it was time, for once, to stop letting the rain dictate his mood. He couldn't banish the seed of darkness inside him, but Stormfather, he didn't need to let it rule him either." End quote. And I really connected with that because, like Kaladin, I do not like rainy, overcast weather. It makes me really sad. It always surprises me how good I feel when the sun finally comes out again. So I just connected with that. And I thought it was a nice marker of growth in Kaladin as well, that he sort of recognized that he is powerful and like has the ability to fight against these things that make him feel not good, or fight against, you know, external things and stand up for himself and make a better life for himself. And I think that's a theme that we see with Kaladin throughout Oathbringers. He sort of embraces his power and embraces who he is and who he's become.
Yeah, absolutely. Specifically, we see this early on with Kaladin. I think it's like chapters 5 through 8 or so in the book, is that Kaladin is racing home to hopefully save and warn his family, his mother and father, as well as the people of Hearthstone, his home village, not even really like a major city. But he fails. He fails at that. His goal was to get back before the Everstorm swept over.
Yeah, and he misses that by a long shot,
like
if
days,
I remember right. Yeah.
And so he runs out of Stormlight. He ends up just having to walk back through the weeping rain to just kind of drizzle, which affects his depression. He's pretty down when he arrives. He's expecting everything to be destroyed. He's expecting the Voidbringers to have killed many of the people that he grew up with. And instead, he returns to the mansion of a couple of the big moments in his early life where, is it Rashon? Rashon, the village keeper or whatever. He's hanging out, and Kaladin has this moment when he like punches Rashon in the face and is like, Rashon's small time. I really shouldn't be worrying about him so much. But I think the big moment that Kaladin has when he's back in Hearthstone is obviously meeting up with his family, but then revealing himself as a Knight Radiant to the people and his mother and father, as well as their newborn son, little baby, Kaladin's brother. And he has this moment where he basically says, like, I can't leave these people with darkness. I can't leave them with sadness. And he instead has this kind of triumphant moment. He like flies up in the air and starts glowing, and his mom has glory spren coming off of her, or awe spren. And it's just a super nice moment to start the book with like Kaladin on an upper.
Yeah.
And having this nice moment. But as Oathbringer continues, I found one of the most interesting things about Kaladin's arc is how connected he feels to basically anyone, including Voidbringers, including the Parshmen who he comes across shortly after that moment.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest conflicts that he comes across in this book, is that as he has sort of expanded his circle, gotten to know more people, more different kinds of people, and let them in and let them affect him, he comes into this conflict of how do you protect people when the people you're trying to protect are on all different sides, and all of those sides are fighting each other and they're not compatible. Like, he can't protect one side without hurting the other side, and he loves them all.
And I find that obviously is like a beautiful sentiment, but it's also a tiny bit surprising. I mean, I don't think that we see many characters who, in the kind of complex way that Kaladin is experiencing this, who just have almost like a universal love. I mean, it doesn't come across really as love in the most like traditional sense, but I find this as like an interesting point about Kaladin and Oathbringer, is just like, dude cannot stop caring about people.
Yeah, I think that's why for me this is my favorite book in terms of Kaladin, because I relate to that very deeply, like this really intense empathy where he truly understands the point of view of everyone. Like, he understands why the Parshmen feel the way they do. He understands why the Alethi feel the way they do. He understands Elokar and everything that Elokar is trying to do. And it's overwhelming.
Absolutely. And he has a experience early on with a group of Parshmen that throws everything that we know into chaos, specifically that the Parshmen are not uniformly turning into the same type of war form that we saw from the Parshendi.
Yeah, and picking up from the end of Words of Radiance, since then I've just been thinking in my brain like, oh my god, they're just going to be all these monsters ravaging everything. And then we see them and they're basically like normal Alethis.
I think the strangest thing for me understanding the complexity that was shown in Oathbringer is we don't really know what the desolation is or what these experiences that have happened in the past. For me, I had the image of the Parshendi as, even when we saw their perspective, Venli or Eshonai, I still saw them as different from human, separate. And in Oathbringer, basically anytime we saw the listeners, they were presented basically as human. And actually a couple of drawings, I don't think they were necessarily canon drawings or done by the professional artist that Brandon hires, but a couple of drawings that just like fans did that showed the listeners as very, very humanoid. And it's not what I envisioned in my head, but it's also not incorrect. Like,
really? Yeah, I always saw them as like basically human, just with like the marbled skin, and they have a little bit of like thicker stature, I guess.
Yeah, even though that's the description. Like, I'm saying I'm wrong in the way that my brain, but they were not human to me or humanoid to me until Oathbringer. Even when we had like Eshonai's perspective, I still didn't envision them in my brain as a similar thing to the humans.
Well, and I think that's what like Kaladin comes across as. He's like, oh my gosh, these people. And then he notices that they are behaving the same. They're like playing a card game and they have kids that they care about in the same way, and like they speak the same way because they've been immersed in Alethi culture.
And from what we learn in Oathbringer is basically that all of the listeners, all of the Parshmen across the realm of Rashar have adopted the personas of the people that they were, slaves under, as they're like Thaylen Parshmen act like Thaylen people. Alethi Parshmen act like Alethi.
Yeah, because that's all they've known.
Exactly.
It's not like they grew up in the listener culture. Like, as far as they're concerned, they're Alethi. That's their entire identity.
And so I just really loved Kaladin's experience of learning that, because I felt like I was learning it at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. It's a nice reveal.
And of course, so much of the tragedy that Kaladin goes through is having this experience of like learning we can call it humanity. We could call it like learning to recognize the existence of a soul in like the listener species. But he recognized this, and then at basically every opportunity throughout the book fails to protect the people that he cares about and he loves. And that is basically Kaladin's experience.
I was going to say that's like Kaladin's kryptonite too, because that's his thing, is protecting people. I
mean, it's one of the ideals that he has to swear. They all revolve around like protection. Yeah. But Kaladin, just looking at Kaladin's story, Oathbringer is very depressing. I mean, it is just bad, like top to bottom. He has this one high point in the beginning.
Yeah, it's kind of the only one where he doesn't really end on a high note, huh? Like he doesn't like triumph in the end.
In fact, so we have the early stage of the book when he's like away from the main group. He eventually gets back to the main group. They agree to go to Kholinar. He like rallies around the city guard and has this moment when he's like leading like 500 people back to the base, all from the city. And Adolin is just like, Bridgman, he's probably their leader now. And it's like it's a high moment, but it doesn't last. Because that is going to be, Kholinar is going to be the site of his biggest failure as he is trying to protect Elhokar, protect his friends in the city guard against the listeners that he befriended at the beginning of the story. And so
it's like his worst nightmare. Like everyone that he knows all of a sudden shows up in the same place and they all start fighting each other.
And it is
bad. And Moash.
And eventually, obviously, Moash is going to come in and make that
even worse.
I mean,
dang you, Moash!
There are more expletives that we could throw out about Moash, but we'll leave that for another moment.
You guys probably already know the hashtag that's going around, so
for sure, a la Game of Thrones, borrowing hashtags from that universe as well. But he has this moment when everyone's around, everybody is fighting, and it is. You said like a nightmare, his nightmare, and that is exactly the experience I had as I was reading. I was like, this is just awful. As portrayed, it's just like Kaladin looking at all of these people dying and like slashing and stabbing each other.
Yeah, and he's just like, there's someone I love. Oh, they're dead. Yeah. There's someone I love. They're fighting another person I love. There's another person I love. Like, and there's just chaos and violence everywhere.
And Elhokar starts saying the words, the first ideal. Moash comes in and Kaladin's like, Moash, no, Moash. And then Moash kills Elhokar.
It's like in slow-mo.
Yeah, and everything is just really bad, and it breaks Kaladin. I mean, Kaladin has obviously had the very low points before. He was a slave.
Yeah, like he's gone through so much, and he has hit, I feel like, what everyone thought, including Kaladin himself, thought was rock bottom.
Yeah, I mean, he went to the edge of the pits.
Yeah, the honor chasm.
The honor chasm. And it, was going to commit suicide. I think in that moment he doesn't say the first ideal, but he does have kind of a understanding and then a reckoning in the first book. But we thought that was his low point, and this just feels so much worse. And it's made clear that it is so much worse because of Kaladin's failure to say the fourth ideal at the end of the book, specifically because of like where he's at psychologically after this kind of devastating moment that I think ends like part 3 of the book.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I think this is kind of a cool, I mean, maybe that's not the right word, but I think this is a poignant parallel in a way to like a recovery process. Like I think we've mentioned a few episodes back, sort of a running motif through this book of addiction, different kinds of addiction. Yeah. And that recovery process of like, it's not a straight line up. If you're recovering from anything, whether it's an eating disorder or depression or PTSD, like doesn't matter what it is, like you're going to relapse and you're going to like have moments when you're not, consistently moving forward. It's like that 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing. So I think that this is kind of a cool parallel there.
Well, I think you're 100% correct. But just think about how rare that is in a story, in a movie, in a book.
Oh, yeah, like, absolutely.
It just doesn't... It happens all the time in the real world. It happens all the time to like you and I and listeners out there, but it's not something that's often portrayed.
Right,
we
don't see that. The traditional
hero's story is basically like, you start at one place, you begin your journey, you fall maybe once, and then you pick yourself back up and you have your heroic moment.
Yeah.
It's basically like you go down and then you go up, and then you end on a high
and
note.
that's the character arc.
And
because then the movie ends and like the end.
But Kaladin, it feels right now like where we left him. Maybe not at the very end of the book. He has kind of a...
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely doing better by the end, but as you said, like, he doesn't say the fourth ideal.
Even as he is looking, once again, this is now at the Battle of Thaylen City, he's experiencing that same thing, watching his friends die, watching the Sadius's army fight against the Kholin army. So you have this experience, and he's looking around, and he's like, I know I have to protect these people. I know that's my thing. I know that's what I'm supposed to do as a Knight Radiant. And it seems like we're going to have another one of these triumphant moments when Kaladin says an ideal and bursts into light and saves the day.
I think that's actually in Shadesmar when he almost says it.
Okay, so yeah, right before the
like before
begins.
They drop into the battle,
And he fails. He basically can't say the ideal.
Yeah, and Syl is like, come on, Kaladin, do it.
Yeah.
Like, you're ready. And he's like, I will. And he just can't.
Now, what ends up happening, and it's, I think, quite a beautiful way to handle failure. It must be nice to have a Syl around. But Syl does say, Kaladin, maybe you don't have to save everybody this time. Maybe someone else can save you. And that's when I think Dalinar is going to merge the three realms together.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And so Kaladin has his big, gigantic fight against Amaram. We talked about that last week. So much going on in the fight itself, and in Thaylen City in general. That stone, and we believe it was one of the Unmade, right? That Amaram ingests.
Oh, yeah, it definitely is.
And that gives them what we think is all of the power of the surges. There may have been some that he didn't have, or some that he did have. I think it was
sure seemed like he had them all, maybe plus some.
Maybe some resonance points going on.
Because I remember being confused because, at first he starts flying, but then he exhibits some of the same things that Lift can do and is sliding around. And I remember just being like, wait, what are you?
The heroes are victorious, I suppose. It's a downer of a book. I honestly don't think that there is a bunch of happiness. I do think that this was a lot of tragedy. We have a tiny bit of joy coming from Dalinar's storyline, but there's a lot.
But his storyline is rough too.
Yeah, and it's not like we come out of Oathbringer and everything is okay.
Yeah.
I mean, we're basically looking down the pipe of a long, drawn out war between various different sides. Economies are going to struggle. Religion and the religious fight is going to pick up. You have Taravangian joining Odium. So it's just seems just
bleak outlook.
Absolutely. I mean, it's tough. And I think we talked about this in our first Oathbringer breakdown. It's just there's a lot of sadness going on. And I think Kaladin embodies that perspective, and then to not get overwhelmed by that, we jump to the different perspectives. For example, Shallan. Did you want to say anything before we move on to Shallan?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, because Shallan is obviously, I would say, our second main character. She's the star of Words of Radiance.
She does a lot in Oathbringer.
Absolutely. And I think that in Oathbringer, she also has a lot of important growth as a character. And hint, hint, I also think she has the most growth as a Knights Radiant. We'll talk about that.
Do you think
in
so?
a moment. We'll do in a moment. Let's go through her character first before I start speculating on the Knights Radiant stuff.
Well, just in terms of growth, I mean, I feel I actually don't see her growing all that much in Oathbringer. I think that Oathbringer is kind of like
a catalyst for change.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is all the crap that you go through before you go through a big like growth spurt personally. You know, there's always that moment where you're just like, everything is a disaster. I'm just in this like soup of awfulness. And then after that, you're like, boop, 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 level up.
I like the Mario call sounds.
Thank you.
But we have Shallan, who comes out of Words of Radiance as one of the only, other than Kaladin, the other Knight Radiant that is known about. She is incredibly significant for the war effort, and as a member of, Dalinar's new team that he's building. And yet, in the beginning of the book, we see her as very dismissive, and she's kind of ignoring a lot of what's going on with the war effort and the economy of Urithiru. She is off doing her own thing a little bit, which eventually I think we figure out is her building up her squires. But she's not 100% in the effort of the...
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of similar to Renarin, she is like trying to figure out what her place is, because who she thought she was, like the niche that she thought that she fit for most of her life, she is now sort of rethinking. Yasna's not there to like manage her studies, and she's kind of like, I don't know, is it really important to study right now? There seems to be more important things, discovering new things about herself, and she doesn't really know what to do with all of it or like where she fits in.
Yeah, and I'm going to be honest, I did not like Shallan in the beginning of the book. I was struggling to see the significance of what she was going through. But as part 1 and part 2 turn into part 3 and part 4, it really starts to make sense. She has a big moment early, I think it might be part 2, maybe even part 1, where she is going to lead a group of mainly bridgemen, and maybe Adolins with them, down into the depths of Urithiru, where they will face off against one of the Unmade, the Midnight Mother.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the coolest moments. I just really liked that Shallan got to do that, and I think that battle can tell us a lot about the Unmade.
Which we explored in, I think, episode 13, so you can go back and listen to all of our Unmade theories. What's the name of the Midnight Mother, the real name?
Re-Shafir.
Re-Shafir, there we go. And Re-Shafir is banished, but not defeated by Shallan, right? We don't think that Shallan killed Re-Shafir, right?
Yeah, I would say that's probably true. We don't really get a confirmation either way. Shallan just kind of opens her eyes and it's not there anymore. But yeah, I would say that's probably a good guess.
One of the most important things that precedes facing off with the Midnight Mother is a story that Shallan tells that will be her story throughout Oathbringer that continually comes up, and that is the girl who looked up. We've briefly talked about this story before, but it is significant to understand. We have the girl who's in a city that's surrounded by a big, gigantic wall, and nobody knows what the wall is for. Nobody knows why it's there. The girl keeps asking questions. She eventually climbs the wall. That's difficult. She gets to the top. She goes down some stairs, and she finds light. She finds specifically Stormlight to return to her people. And Shallan tells this story originally, and it's going to come up again with everybody's friend Wit, or Hoyd. But this story of the girl who looked up is also Shallan's story. It's a mirror. I feel like it's a tiny story inside of the bigger story.
How do you think it reflects Shallan?
I think that the concept of a girl who feels trapped or surrounded by a lack of knowledge or a lack of the correct people around her, and then goes off on her own to kind of have this triumphant, climbing of the wall, finding the stormlight, returning it to her people. But the way that the story is told, both by Shallan at different times and by Wit at different times, I think is really what's important. I think as we return and kind of reread and re-listen to Oathbringer, we'll find that as that story changes, as different aspects are emphasized in that story, it's hinting at changes that the characters themselves are experiencing as well.
Yeah. And I think that's a pretty good call, because when Shallan thinks and speaks about her childhood and her home life, she talks about like darkness encompassing the house, sort of. So I think you're spot on with sort of relating that to her.
One of the things that is often made most clear in Shallan's story is this theme of failure. I mean, we've talked about Dalinar's failure, we've talked about Kaladin's failure, and Shallan experiences this as well, specifically in Kholinar.
Yeah, I think Shallan's whole storyline is sort of like an early version of Dalinar's storyline,
Yes.
sort of. She's trying to make peace with things that she's done in the past. She's not doing that very well. She's running away from it, just like Dalinar did with alcohol. Shallan's sort of running away from it with magic.
I think that's a really good call. Like, Shallan's addiction is her magic.
Yeah.
And I think that we have talked so much about addiction with Teft and Fire Moss, Dalinar, and alcohol, but we did not mention that basically what Shallan is dealing with is magic addiction and the different effects of that addiction is... Now I want to go reread the whole thing and just think of like, and kind of watch Shallan develop this addiction.
Yeah.
Because that's what it is.
Yeah, I don't think I really like put those pieces together until now, but she uses it exactly like, a drug addict would. Yeah, where she comes across circumstances that might be a little bit stressful, and her thought is automatically, I can't do this by myself. I need something to supplement me.
Yes. Man, I am just flabbergasted that I didn't catch. We talked so much about addiction.
Yeah.
I literally was like weeping at Tef's addiction and Dalinar.
And there are like subtle themes of it throughout the book that we talked about.
Yeah, but I mean, you're 100% accurate that she is latching on to light weaving as if it is a drug. It is her drug, her escape, and her joy. I mean, she literally becomes Veil.
Right. She remains in these exterior characters for days, weeks at a time.
To experience, a joy that she is not experiencing as... It's no different than Teft getting high or Dalinar getting drunk.
Exactly.
It's like... Nice call.
So beautiful. Good writing, Brandon.
It's not us. We didn't do anything.
Yeah, we're just like unpeeling the layers of this magnificent story.
And we have talked last week or 2 weeks ago, episode 14, with Hoyd about how he joined Shallan during her lowest point and kind of enhances her own light weaving, and that's when she starts to go from her lowest point and rise back up.
Yeah, she definitely, I don't think she rises very far.
I agree.
She like barely pulls herself up, but she does, which is good. But I do love what Hoyd says to her in that moment. Quote, "You mostly failed. This is life. The longer you live, the more you fail. Failure is the mark of a life well lived. In turn, the only way to live without failure is to be of no use to anyone." End quote. And I just thought that was like a nice sentiment of like, yeah, you did. You failed. It's kind of a moment.
Pretty bad. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. We kind of, it's like a moment to expect sort of a motivational speech. And Hoyd does not deliver that really. He's like, yeah, you're right. You didn't do good. Not great. Not great, kid. But like, you're alive and you're trying, which I think is also the heart of the first ideal.
One of the things that to me is most interesting about Shallan's use of magic is that, one, she gets a lot better at it during this. I mean, we see a bunch of kind of new or just enhanced versions of her light weaving, whether it's joining with Dalinar to create the interactive map of Rashar, or teaching and training her. I mean, they're her squires. Mm-hmm. They start
apprentices.
Yes, they start out as, the characters that it's very easy to dismiss of, oh, that's the scoundrel, or that's the runaway with one eye. But we have...
Oh, I love that Gaz, gets so into it.
And it's great to see a character who is not even secondary. I mean, he's tertiary.
Yeah.
From the very first book, we had Gaz, and we still have Gaz, and he's changed and grown. And, we could tell a whole spin-off series just about Gaz.
That's true.
It's an interesting story. Like, Gaz has got a lot going on, and it's complex.
And he's not even, in that much.
Oh, no. Like, we don't know a whole bunch about Gaz. It was mentioned here and there. Like, we know more about Rock than we do about Gaz.
No, but I mean, that's what I'm saying.
It's just so good.
He's not even in it that much, and yet Brandon has managed to weave in, so many good details that we feel like, yeah, I could do a Gaz spinoff.
So Shallan's powers are escalating and they're increasing, but part of what she is dealing with is, I hesitate to give specific psychological disorders, but I see it as a split personality type of thing that she is struggling with.
I know a lot of people are kind of throwing that around on the internet as well. Oh, obviously Shallan has multiple personality disorder. And I mean, I am not a licensed therapist, but it's always been my impression that if you have multiple personality disorder, you're not aware of it.
Well, I don't think she has multiple personality disorder. I think what you said about it being a drug or an addiction is closer to what's going on. But the way that it's manifesting with these three distinct personalities and characters, I do think is important. So we have Shallan, the girl who killed her mother and father. We have Vale, who first appeared in Words of Radiance.
Yeah, and she comes up as sort of a lower class version of Shallan that can mix with the ghost bloods. That was her original purpose, was ghost bloods go between. Vale.
Absolutely. And she is defined in part by the big gigantic hat that she wears, and I think the white and red cloak.
White coat.
Yeah. And then we have Radiant, or Brightness Radiant. This is, from Shallan's perspective,
herself as Yasna.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, yeah, the hero Shallan.
She's very stately and poised, always sure of herself, and sophisticated.
What I think is most interesting in terms of Shallan's power growth is obviously what happens with Wit during his version of the telling of the story of the girl who looked up. When I mentioned this in episode 14, Shallan's light weaving power is kind of like augmented reality, where there's little holograms that dance around on top of the real world, but you're still aware of the real world. And it's the map that Dalinar can see, but you still know that you're in a room looking at a light weaved map. But when Hoyd boosts her power, it's virtual reality. When they step into the story and the walls disappear and vanish, and it's much more realistic when Hoyd is giving her that boost. So that's big power moment number one.
And then that she's able to use it again later in the battle. Yeah.
So during the battle, she is able to create hundreds, if not thousands, of soldiers to assist the Kholin army against Sadius's army. And importantly, she gives the soldiers weight or she gives them...
They have like physical substance.
Yes, physical substance. Great way to say it. Because they are able to actually not fight or like kill anybody, but to kind of put up a momentary challenge to a real individual.
Yeah, they're harder to get through.
Yeah, exactly. They swing a sword and the sword actually bounces off. Maybe not infinitely, and they're obviously not complex, but it might be like, instead of a...
Previously, like, you waved your hand and it, like, disintegrated. Now they can hold up against at least a couple swings of the sword before they go away.
And Shallan specifically mentions that she believes this is a combination between her two powers of...
illumination and transformation.
Excellent. Those are the surges.
Yeah.
And so she does think that it is kind of a combo resonance point between her two powers. That's a huge power up. But then I think the most interesting thing that happens to Shallan, and this is not coming from me directly. I did pull this off of the Stormlight Archive Reddit.
Yeah, there's been a lot of people theorizing about this, so I don't feel bad reiterating it because it's been said a lot.
So I think, because I agree with the person from Reddit, I think that Shallan is the first Knights Radiant that we have seen who has manifested Shardplate. I think that at the end of the book, the way that Shallan presented it is that all of her personas, Shallan, Veil, and Radiant, were all creating light-weaved soldiers with, that weight we talked about. But then...
And I think they're like holding hands, aren't they?
Yes, mm-hmm. and so they're all kind of working together and simultaneously. But then when, I think it's Yasna...
Yeah, I think it is.
Who comes out to meet Shallan after the battle is over, she goes up to Shallan, the one that she believes is like in the middle and is the main Shallan.
Normal Shallan.
Yeah, and that Shallan is light woven, and it disintegrates when Yasna approaches her. And
I don't think so.
It does. And then she looks to Veil, and Veil disintegrates, and the thing that is left, the person that is left, the last Shallan, is Radiant, standing splendid in her Shardplate, and then the Shardplate disintegrates around Shallan. The last Shallan that appears is Radiant in Shardplate. And there's so much going on that it's easy to overlook that, but now you're doubting me, so we're going to have to do some mid-show research.
Yeah, I don't think that's right.
So we just did some research, and we have polled, and now I want to give the shout out to the actual Reddit user. This is user Ray745 on the Reddit, who pointed out this theory that Shallan is the first Knights Radiant we see in full Shardplate. From the actual book, here's the quote. Quote, "That should buy us a few moments." Yasna turned toward Radiant, Veil, and Shallan. She took Shallan by the arm, but Shallan wavered, then puffed away. Yasna froze, then turned to Veil. "Here," Radiant said, tired, stumbling to her feet. She was the one Yasna could feel. She blinked away tears. "Are you real?" "Yes, Shallan. You did well out there." End quote.
And it mentions earlier in that passage that Radiant is wearing glowing garnet shardplate.
So the theory is presented, I believe, first by Ray745, that Shallan's our first Knights Radiant to manifest Shardplate in this battle of Thaylen City. And we also know that she does not have to say additional ideals in the same manner that other Knights Radiant do. So it would also make sense that she didn't have like one triumphant moment where she said some words and then manifest Shardplate. She's able to do it with her like the sacrifice of truths by telling, like,
yeah, she speaks truths, and she was ahead of most of the other budding Knights Radiant.
Absolutely.
Yeah, by the time we see her in the first book, so.
Those are our two big characters, but we still have some more to round out this episode.
I mean, I do want to just quickly mention Shallan's relationship with Adolin.
Oh, of course, because
his role in her story, I think, is just really sweet and really important, and I love that he is able to see her even when she's like trying to disguise herself and she feels like, I'm not good enough for this amazing man. Like, I don't know why he loves me, but he does. And she tries to hide from him and he is always like, wait, nope, there you are. And it's just super sweet and I love it.
Yeah, when they get married at the end of the book, Adolin has this to say about Shallan, quote, "You don't have to hide, Shallan. You don't have to push it down. Maybe the vase is cracked, but that only means it can show what's inside. And I like what's inside." End quote.
So cute.
It is cute. Anything else we want to add about Shallan?
No, that's it.
Okay, so moving on to Taravangian. Taravangian, definitely a minor player in Way of Kings and Words of Radiance.
I mean, is Taravangian ever a minor player?
A minor player compared to Odium. Yeah, no, you're totally right.
Shots fired.
He is definitely a significant mover in the world of Rashar. In terms of screen time, we only see him in Way of Kings and Words of Radiance in the interludes, where in Oathbringer he is, quite apparent throughout many people's storyline. Mm-hmm. Dalinar's most obvious.
Yeah.
But even in other characters mention interactions with Taravangian as well. So important things that happen in Oathbringer with Taravangian. One, he is the first leader to join Dalinar's alliance.
I mean, we know why.
Absolutely. I mean, he's working at that point, he is working to become king of all humans on Rashar. He already has 2 kingdoms under his belt. Through the use of Szeth as the assassin, he was able to put himself on the throne of a second kingdom. And he joins the alliance to hopefully take power. But what I found so interesting about Taravangian's storyline is how much doubt was put in to what had originally been presented, the diagram, as a kind of creation of near perfect future sight.
Yeah, well, and I think it brings up a good point of like, if a genius writes something as a genius, like, it's hard for not geniuses to really comprehend what it is saying, which is the problem that Taravangian comes across as like, I wrote this, but I'm not 100% sure that I'm interpreting it the right way or like reading it the right way because I am no longer a genius that wrote this.
Well, and he has a near genius day in Oathbringer. It's using the phrase genius to mean his highest point ever when he created the diagram. He has a near genius day. What is interesting about that day is that, one, he purposefully does not finish his test to see how much power he's allowed to have because
he knows that they'll take away his power if he passes.
I just love that aspect that like previous Taravangian was like, if you are too smart, you don't get as much power.
Yeah.
Like just being intelligent does not lead you to make the best decisions.
Well, and I think especially because he knows that his intelligence is inversely related to his compassion and he knows that that could be bad.
And so he kind of purposefully does not complete his test, hinting that he should not be making any changes to the diagram, but then he makes a bunch of changes to the diagram. And what we find out is that this has happened not just like once before, but this may have happened a couple of times before, because not only is it remarked by his advisors that he has changed the diagram previously, but there's even a passage about how his advisors disagreed with the way he changed the diagram, and so they branched off. Yeah, his advisor branched off and went off to do his own thing, following like the OG diagram before Taravangian. It's weird when you start to try to put together this concept of like, oh, we had this perfect diagram that told the future, and now Taravangian's been taking advantage of it, but wait, he's also been changing the diagram over and over again. The diagram's been wrong about Dalinar.
Right.
And Taravangian is then going back and being like, oh no, it wasn't the diagram that was wrong, it was my interpretation of the diagram that was wrong. And I think that this is giving us a big hint about what Hoyd said, and that we have mentioned a couple times on this podcast now. Never trust anyone who claims to know the future.
Well, but I think that there's a call to that in the book when Odium specifically says that Taravangian put together the diagram without access to future sight. So I think it's less of a prediction of the future, and the way Taravangian actually describes it is that he was so smart, he was able to make observations and connections between things in the present and like extrapolate from that likely events in the future.
But at the same time, you're totally right. I remember that passage from Odium remarking that like he was amazed that he did this without access to the spiritual realm. But I also don't think he did it without access to the spiritual realm, because in that same chapter, it's at the very end of the book when Odium and Taravangian are having their conversation, Taravangian looks at the diagram and sees that he wrote himself a quote that he will now say to Odium, convincing Odium to make the deal with Taravangian. That can't happen because you're super intelligent in the past and you see all of the connections. That's got to be a little... I'm not saying it has to be. It seems like that would have to be a little bit of future sight.
What if your brain is so augmented that you have the ability to imagine hundreds of future possibilities?
That's totally cool, but that's not what happens in the passage. What happens at the end of the book is Taravangian like literally laughs out loud when he looks at a quote and then reads straight from the diagram. Like it's not like a hint about like one day maybe Odium will show up and you could possibly convince him to do this.
Yeah.
He literally reads from the diagram, and the quote that he says is, paraphrasing, Odium, you can't face Dalinar because you agreed to a battle of champions. You need your agents to work for you. I'll be your agent. You need me right now. Not forever, but you need me right now. And Odium agrees, and he makes the deal with Taravangian. You're not wrong about Odium saying that.
My impression was that Taravangian had, like, this was his contingency plan. That genius Taravangian was like, if you ever get into this situation, because it's possible, like, try this.
You totally could be right. I am not 100%, because we also know that Taravangian used the death rattles from Moalak to augment the diagram.
That's true.
So I'm not 100% convinced there was no
future sight at all. Yeah, I think that's fair.
But you could be right about like the basis of the diagram, and then augmentations and stuff happen using, cheating future sight.
Yeah.
But what I think is most significant about that final meeting with Taravangian, and really the only reason I wanted to talk about Taravangian, is because he is going to drop this hint from the diagram that I think is hugely significant. Quote, there, behind where the bed had stood, a section of words that had faded from golden to black. What was that? As he drew near, Taravangian saw that the words were blacked out into eternity, starting from this point on his wall, as if something had happened here, a ripple in what Odium could see. At its root, a name, Renarin Kholin. End quote.
So Renarin is like literally in a blind spot of Odium.
Exactly. Odium, for whatever, because this is what's happening in this moment when Taravangian sees this, is that Odium is like boosting Taravangian's power of the diagram.
Well, yeah, he just comes in and he's like, oh yeah, I know about your diagram. Bam.
Yeah.
Like,
but
this is all of it.
Well, yeah, but he's letting Taravangian see the diagram through Odium's eyes. And so when Taravangian cannot see this point, he's viewing that through Odium. So that's like the hint that we know that Odium can't see what's going on with Renarin Kholin. This is another, in my view, game breaker that's going on. Renarin is a blind spot to Odium.
Yeah, and like, why do you think that is?
I have no idea why that is. We know that Renarin has bonded a corrupted Spren.
But
why would that matter to Odium?
Yeah, exactly. It seems like that would almost bring him closer to Odium.
That is the fear, obviously, that Yasna has, and that's the fear that we presented in the last episode when we were talking about Renarin. But I have no idea why bonding a corrupted Spren would make Renarin blind to Odium. Could it be something specific with Renarin? I don't know what that would be, but okay, so like there's something with his name. There's something about Renarin's name.
Oh, maybe.
One that is
that
born
he was
unto
born
himself.
Unto himself, and that is like a protective layer, sort of.
Kind of, like maybe there's something going on that's like Harry Potter-esque, where like, and this could be like totally wrong, but like the mother like passed on some protection, or like something is going on with like Renarin himself. What
if Evie used some sort of like eerie magic when she was pregnant with Renarin?
Possible,
because she is like not around Dalinar at all.
A tradition of cultivation, or like the people from her land that's normal, that, that like all groups have, of just like, oh, when you're pregnant, you should do this to protect the baby.
And she probably didn't with Adolin because she was like trying to be a good Alethi. Yeah, but then Dalinar's gone forever and ever.
I don't know.
I mean, who knows? I know. I'm just like literally throwing out random things.
All I know is that like, I think this is a big deal. I think that Odium not being able to see Renarin, Renarin really being able to bond to a corrupted Spren, it's giving us the hints at like how the end game is going to play out, in my opinion. And I think that's a good call. I think the end game is also very reliant on our next two characters. So let's
can we go to our next game breaker next?
You want to? Okay, skipping to the next huge game breaker. That is Lift.
So we knew that she was a little bit unique before this, but it's heavily confirmed in Oathbringer that Lift is a game breaker.
Lift does not play by the rules.
By any of the rules, it seems like.
Doesn't care about rules.
Yeah, Lift is just like, I'm going to do whatever I want.
We see this multiple times, but most significantly is that Lift is able to, at will, jump into the visions that Dalinar is having, and is at least somewhat protected from Odium's sight as well. She is able to kind of avoid Odium's power.
Well, it seems like she can avoid pretty much everyone's power, because the Stormfather specifically says...
calls her out too.
Yeah, because she shows up and Dalinar's like, who are you? Like, Stormfather, what the heck? And he's like, I didn't invite her. Yeah, and he specifically says, quote, this is a creation specifically meant to defy my will.
And he's saying that a creation of cultivation, I think. Like, he's saying cultivation did this to defy my will.
Yeah, because he goes on to say, quote, "This child is tainted by the Night Watcher. This is unnatural. She goes too far," which he's referencing the Night Watcher and cultivation and the hand that they have had in this.
Yeah, and I find this very interesting. We talked about how Dalinar's boon and curse were not actually a boon and a curse in the traditional sense. They were a gift of cultivation, possibly cultivation playing a hand she knew she would have to play in the future. But I think she's doing the same thing with Lift.
It does make me wonder. I mean, obviously we don't know, but Lift, you know, quote unquote, went to see the Night Watcher, which is exactly what Dalinar said. But it could be that her story is the same as Dalinar's, where that's what she went there for, but she actually ended up interacting with cultivation herself and not the Night Watcher.
Yeah, because we know that Lift said that she wanted or wished for things to stop changing, or for her to stop changing.
Just, herself to stop changing.
Yeah, and so she thinks she's 10 because she doesn't count above how many fingers she has. But she's definitely not 10. She's like a teenager, 13, 14. Yeah. We know she can metabolize Stormlight. Yeah. We know she can interact with Wendell.
And Wendell says in Edge Dancer that Lift must exist, at least partially, in the cognitive realm in order to be able to interact with him physically the way that she does.
Now, we see a bunch of the cognitive realm in Oathbringer, not Lift there, but we do see that it is possible for physical beings to live in the cognitive realm.
And kind of dip in and out.
Yeah, and people like Chris, Cosmere Scholar, are obviously jumping in and out, and you have the whole city of Silverlight that is not just inhabited by Spren. It also has people there as well. So we know that's not an impossibility, but it seems like kind of like what Yasna did at the end of Oathbringer, where she described without effort being able to see into the cognitive realm instantaneously, and her powers being much, much greater.
Or I'm thinking, I mean, it's kind of just the same as like the emotions Bren that we see in Shadesmar, how they exist in the cognitive realm, but little pieces of them sort of shine through to the other side.
And this would be like the reverse.
Yeah, so Lift is mostly in the physical realm, but there's a little piece of her that's just always sort of dragging or trailing through the cognitive realm.
This is just a weird idea, but you know how the Spren manifest in the physical realm as like one part of their body that is all existing in the cognitive realm? What if what if like an aspect of Lift's mentality or something is like in the cognitive realm?
I was gonna say, what if her stomach is in the cognitive realm?
Just her stomach,
and that's why she can metabolize Stormlight.
I mean,
I know that's like weird, but
it's definitely weird. But that's what I was saying, is like some part of her is like in the cognitive realm. Stomach, why not?
There's just like a floating stomach in Shadesmar.
But Lift is a game breaker. Lift doesn't follow the rules. Renarin doesn't follow some of the rules. Both have blind spots, or both are blind spots to Odium.
They've got to be important in the larger fight. Like, I wonder, I feel like either Renarin or Lift has got to go on to be like the humans champion against Odium. Like, wouldn't that make sense? Why would you not pick the game breaker to be like your point person against the enemy, you know?
Well, I think that there is at least some speculation that Lift is going to be that champion.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that I think Renarin could be like the person who sets up Lift to become the champion. Like, I think he's super necessary too, but I think that it's completely...
On the other hand, Renarin actually fought an Oathbringer, and Lift has a stick.
Wendell just doesn't like hurting things.
I also like that when she like swings him, he's like, ow, when she like hits things with the stick. Wendell's like, ow, you're hurting me.
So we have Lift the Game Breaker, but we have another Game Breaker. I mean, we got Game Breaker after Game Breaker. We have another Game Breaker in Oathbringer. It is a sentient but not humanoid Game Breaker. And that...
Are you talking about Nightblood?
Of course I'm talking about Nightblood. Let's go over to our boy, Seth.
Our boy.
Yeah. Seth, the assassin in white. What a journey he has had as well. I mean...
Yeah.
From the truthless assassin, killer of Gavilar, we have this growth that happens with the character of Szeth leading up to Words of Radiance. He believed that he was banished from his homeland of Shinovar for good reason. Of course, he was proven correct. The Voidbringers are returning. The Knights Radiant have remanifested.
Right. So he was incorrect about being banished for a good reason.
Oh, yes. But the stated reason why he was banished is because he went around and told people.
Right, and they were like, you're a liar.
The Voidbringers are coming back, and everybody was like, no, that's ridiculous. Desolations are over forever. And so now you're banished. And he has that whole experience that can, at least in part, be summarized by the story of the Wandersail and the people who, thinking that the king is around and going to punish them for all of their bad deeds.
Yeah, total side note, but the parables told in these books are really important also. And there was a few told in Oathbringer that I haven't quite been able to
You can't put all the pieces together yet.
Yeah, but I know that they're important.
Always pay attention to the stories and the parables.
Yes.
They are, I mean, Tolkien did this as well with telling or having the characters singing songs or reading poetry and telling tiny stories within stories. I know modern author Pat Rothfuss is well known for this as well. Stories or songs within the bigger story. But this is the way that Brandon kind of joins that group of individuals, is these parallels and stories that are going on in this one. The Girl Who Looked Up was huge, but there were several others. Those side stories are super important. Seth, of course, ends Words of Radiance by being given Nightblood by Nail, and he's going to continue training with Nail as a Skybreaker.
His relationship with Nightblood is so cute.
I mean, it's fairly fantastic. But Szeth goes around training with other Skybreakers. We find out that the Skybreakers were the one group of Knights Radiant
that never went away.
Never went away. There were always at least some version of Skybreakers. We don't know if they were manifesting in the same way in the past, but we know that Nail was around, and we know that the Skybreakers never broke up like the other ones.
So they have fully formed infrastructure in terms of chain of command and how they train and blah blah blah.
What I found most interesting about that kind of training montage is how much Szeth was able to resist the kind of urge that other Skybreakers in training had, where they were almost just following the orders of Nail, no questions asked. That we need to go kill these people. I think they were in the Pure Lake, and it was criminals are abound. Go catch the criminals and kill them or find them. And Szeth basically just questioned the entire thing. He's why are we doing this? What are the rules here? What are the laws here?
Well, I think it was just very clear that Szeth is more mature and more experienced than anyone else.
And not just the other Skybreakers in training. I also think that he has had more significant growth as a person than Nail, the Herald of Justice.
That's interesting.
Because near the end of the book, before he joins Dalinar, Nail and Szeth are flying above the battlefield, and Nail specifically remarks, when Szeth asks, can I pick a person to swear my third ideal to instead of a set of laws? And Nail says, yeah, some of the other Skybreakers in training are swearing their third ideal to me, but I don't know if that's a good idea because I feel like I'm getting worse. Nail is suffering the deterioration that we believe all the heralds are suffering from, but he actually calls it out and actually gives voice to that concern.
And I think that that's part of the arc that we see him begin in Edge Dancer.
Yes,
is
absolutely.
Lift sort of brings to his attention, like, hey bro, what are you doing? And he's like, oh my god, what is happening to me?
And so Szeth is going to, of course, in that conversation with Nail, Nail is going to point out, don't make the same mistake that you made in the past of swearing your allegiance to men. Men are the things that caused your pain. All of your pain, all of your failures came because you followed men. And then Szeth drops his big line when he says, quote, perhaps I was simply forced to follow the wrong men, end quote.
Which is like very noble, but to be honest, I agree with Nolan. I was like happy to see Szeth, join the fight for good with Dalinar and friends, but I was a little bit like, that seems ill-advised.
But he does. He joins Dalinar, zooms down to help out, and of course, bringing with him that game-breaker sword that is Nightblood. Nightblood is fully unleashed. We see it a little bit in Warbreaker. There are, but it's mainly just moments. It's like hinting at what Nightblood could be. Szeth straight up pulls Nightblood out the sheath, throws the sheath.
Well, and he is able to do that because of the sort of perpendicularity thing that's created. Because
Stormlight.
Nightblood can just endlessly pull on the Stormlight and not kill Szeth.
Until he almost does, and nearly does kill Szeth. But Nightblood is just wrecking the soldiers, and eventually an entire Thunderclast is brought down by Nightblood. Am I remembering that moment correctly?
I don't remember that moment, but like we've said, there's so much happening. I feel like I was actually at the battle. Like I'm so overwhelmed with everything that was happening.
Exactly, too much. We're suffering PTSD from the battle, like our memories going. I know. I think Szeth uses Nightblood to vanquish a Thunderclast. I could totally be wrong about this moment, but like I think that happened. I could call me out, people, on the Twitter, on the Reddit, but. We know that Nightblood is a game breaker. We know that Nightblood is able to feed on any type of investiture that is available, including the souls of people, and it will just do that continually until it's put in its sheath, which we do believe is made out of aluminum. Is that correct?
I don't know. I don't think so, because I think it's described as being black, if I'm not mistaken.
It's specifically called out as a. I think there is black on the actual sheath, but the edge is described as a silvery metal, and I think that it's actually something that Odium wants. Odium, and he might get it for a moment, but like Odium wants the sheath of Nightblood because it has aluminum, and we know that aluminum in the Cosmere has the ability to kind of nullify other types of magic going on. Let's move to our last character, unless you have anything to say about Szeth or Nightblood.
I guess like my only disappointment with Szeth is that we didn't learn much more about his backstory, which is what I'm really interested in, because I would love to hear more about the Shin culture and why he was thrown out and stuff like that. But one little tidbit that we got that I thought was super intriguing was, quote, I knew a voice like yours once, Sword Nimi.
The Whispers?
No, a single one in my mind when I was young. Szeth shaded his eyes, looking across the glistening lake. I hope things go better this time. End quote.
Now, when he says when I was young, which basically removes the possibility that this is a voice he was hearing during like Way of Kings or Words of Radiance.
Right. Well, and that's what he says, like when Nightblood asks him if it's the Whispers are like those voices of the dead that he's killed since Way of Kings. So he's talking about before that. I'm thinking in relation to whatever got him declared truthless.
And we also learn a little bit about his backstory in Shinovar, because he remarks, and I think this is a big deal, he remarks that he is trained with all of the honor blades.
Yeah, except for like one or two, I think he says.
The ones that the Shin people don't have.
Right.
But yeah, all the honor blades that the Shin have, which I think it was 8 or possibly
7 or 8, yeah.
He's trained with all of those, and we learned this when he witnesses Lift and her like paddle movement, because she is not good enough of a edge dancer to move around on her feet and kind of skate across the environment. Instead, she's down on her knees, and Zeth calls us out. He's basically like, I could do better because I trained as a young person with the edge dancer honor blade.
Right, which is also what makes him such a powerful warrior, because not only is he practiced with having the surges, but he's practiced with how to fight against them as well.
Yes, and I think that is going to be hugely important.
Yes.
Like, he might become like a professor of the Knights Radiant in some way, like, you know, teaching everyone and kind of leading the training of the Knights Radiant. That would be
very cool. Okay, let's move on
to our final character, probably one of the most interesting characters and one of the most significant in the next book, or possibly the 5th book in the Stormlight Archive. But this is Venli. Venli, the original Parshendi who learned how to capture Stormform, brought along the Everstorm, brought along Odium.
And we see her in a very different place in this book. She is having a lot of regret and remorse and doubt about her past actions.
What I found most interesting about the development of her character is that she was appointed to be kind of a evangelist for Odium in what was called envoy form, which is a form of power.
Yes.
But
it's like the least powerful form of power.
Kind of, yeah. But she's given this role of going around to the other listeners.
Well, not the listeners. She goes to the former Parshmen, which they don't really have a name for them, but it's specifically those of their race who used to be Parshmen slaves, and she tells this carefully crafted story that she has memorized, that she was given to say about the listener history. So
she is a means of propaganda for Odium.
Exactly.
I think that's the best way to look at it. She is a propagandist, and
so she's trying to unite all of the Parshmen and say, no, you're not all, different Parshmen from Alethi, from Kholinar, from different places, but you're all part of the same people. We have the same story, and us as a group need to fight them, the enemy.
What I find most interesting about this role is that Venli does not appear to be in a super powerful position with Odium. Like, it seems like Odium doubts her, or at least recognizes that she has her own doubts, and it is not as if Venli is being set up to become Odium's champion or anything like that.
Right. She's like under house arrest.
Almost. Yeah, absolutely. And what I think is, most telling about this kind of rift that's developing in Venli is that she literally bonds, or at least kind of comes close to bonding, 2 different Spren. She has the Void Spren that makes her envoy form, and previously made her things like storm form. But she also has do we know what type of Spren Timber is, or even if he's a normal spren?
I believe it is a normal spren. So she comes across Timber, I think, around the body of Aishni, right?
Yes,
initially.
The first time, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And she, like, hides it from Odium, which is a physical depiction of her, like, struggle if she wants to stay void or, like, go good. But I think that it is... Oh, shoot. I want to say a light spren. What kind of spren is Captain Eco? It's been suspected, anyway, that Timber is the daughter of Captain Eco, who is a spren that ferries the gang in Shadesmar. He has a comment that his daughter used to work at a particular shop until she ran off chasing stupid dreams.
And so we assume that spren don't like when their siblings or daughters or whatever run off to the physical realm. That would be the stupid dream of, like, bonding with a human. Because
Syl is spoken of in, like, almost the same exact words of, like, she ran off chasing dreams.
But it's definitely not Syl that Captain Eco is referencing.
Right.
So he's referencing someone else. Who is that someone else? Possibly Timber. But while early on, this relationship is just a kind of protection thing of, like, come here, little spren, you can hang out with me, I guess, for now. This eventually turns into a Knights Radiant situation, right?
Yeah, she ends up bonding to it at the very end of the book, and it's surprising because she didn't know, none of the fans knew, that she would be able to bond to spren. She still has the spren that's making her envoy form, and in her gem heart, she's able to, like, fit Timber in there too.
Yeah, and so this is obviously the first time we've seen anything like this. We don't have a whole bunch of information about the ramifications of this, but by the end of Oathbringer, Venli has bonded to spren, and conceivably this could be just a simple physical representation of the split between Void and, Risharian. But it also could be hinting at the fact that maybe there is not a physical limit to the spren that you can bond. Like, if she can bond
That's
2,
interesting.
maybe she can bond 3. And maybe it's only a thing you can do if you have a gem heart. So maybe the humans can only bond 1, but for some reason, relating to, like, this ancient ability of, like, reincarnation or something, the listeners are able to bond multiple spren simultaneously. Like, we really just don't know because we don't have...
This is the first example.
Yeah, and even the first time we meet any of the Parshendi, they are a broken people who don't know their own history and are kind of rediscovering things. So we don't have a whole bunch of detail about what this means, but she says the first ideal, she bonds to Timber, and also has another spren inside of her, making her, or a void spren, making her envoy form. What does this mean? What are your theories out there in the not Cosmere world, just the people who love the Cosmere? What do you think this means for Venli? What do you think this means for the Stormlight Archive? What theories do you have about any of these characters, or, shout out some characters that we didn't mention?
I just want to make a quick call that not everyone may know. Timber is also a call to the music theory.
Absolutely, Timber.
It's actually pronounced like timbre or something, and I'm not going to do a good description of it, but it has to do with, like, the sound quality, like it's used in relation to people's voices a lot. The timbre of their voice was XYZ.
So we're going to continue to learn all about that music theory and probably do an entire episode just talking about the music theory in the future.
Because there's so much.
Give us a shout out on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, at Cosmere Convo.
Until next time, life before death.
Strength before weakness.
Journey before destination.